Hello everyone and welcome back to the 23rd episode of the Road to FIDE Masters series, in which I will cover the round number 8 from Irena Warakamska Memorial, in which I got paired with Michalina Rodzińska from Poland, woman grandmaster, once again with white pieces. Michalina is a very successful player. She is a double Polish woman chess champion and she won those titles in 2022 and 2023, so fresh successes. So yeah, pretty good motivation for myself, because I myself had some successes in my junior years, under 10 years old, under 18 years old, but in the senior years, let's say, I did not ever accomplish much. Michalina did, so it was my motivation to try to fight and give my best against her. So let's start with the game. I decided to go with the e4 move, after which I knew that Michalina normally plays either c5 or c6. This time she opted for c5 and I've prepared something new with b3. It's not my usual approach, and I can tell you even more that usually after d4 I very much like playing against e6 structures in general. However, I felt like she might be prepared for it and I went with something new. She replied with knight c6, obvious move, bishop b2, and at this point she opted for d6. This move already caught me by surprise a little bit, because this move did not exist in my notes. So the question is, are my notes okay, or is this move not okay? And I did not know the answer during the game, but I assumed that my notes should be okay, right? Because I've prepared them for quite some time. Therefore d6 might not be the best option. So how should I reply to this move? In my notes I mainly had a6, queen c7 or knight f6 ideas. Neither of them closes the dark squares for this bishop. What do I mean by that? If I, let's say, choose a move a6 for black, now I cannot really play d4, because if I exchange now, the problem is that I might be pressured on the dark squares and e4 pawn. How? Well, just let's consider such a variation in which then later on queen will go to c7 and I'm being pressured, pinned, and so on, and I don't really like it. Therefore, the same thing happens in the queen c7 line. I'm not really that allowed to play d4. So when comparing those variations to the one that was in the game, which is d6, I felt like, okay, now this bishop is blocked, so maybe that's the green light for me and I can indeed push d4. After this move, however, my opponent replied very fast and she played queen f6. And I was like, okay, what's going on? I did not have this d6 move in my notes. Now the queen f6 is the follow-up. What is going on? Am I already getting into some kind of trap or preparation? I did not know that. After the game I checked that it was my problem, not the opponent's, that I have not checked the d6 move, because d6 move at this point is actually the main line. But then thankfully I replied well, and queen f6 took me by surprise, also because it's not the best move. So I feel like my opponent just mixed up the variations, but at the time of playing the game I did not know that, and it looked rather scary, because such a move played with a confidence and quickly in the opening might scare you. So what was my thinking process? In general, I wanted to define what are the problems with such move, because usually early queen moves have some backside to it, right? So I felt like this queen move will perhaps slow down the development a little bit if I will play it correctly. That's the first weakness. The other weakness is it weakens the c7 square, so I was thinking about such maneuvers. So those were the problems with this move. What are the good things about this move? I am pinned here, right? So I was not that sure, is it okay or not for me. Therefore, I had two main candidate moves, either e5, trying to block the pressure to the d4 pawn and also get some tempo on the opponent's queen, or indeed knight c3, because I did not care that much about d4 being closed, because I was really aiming towards the c7 square. So let's consider knight c3. Doesn't matter if she takes with the knight first or with the pawn. I would then play knight b5, trying to hit there and there, making the queen perhaps go back, and in the end making me able to take the pawn on d4. So I felt like, okay, I would not be losing pawn for a long time. However, did I like the positions? I was not that sure. I was calculating them and I felt like they might be okay. But then I felt, okay, if opponent is playing so fast, maybe she will play like a6 move, trying to take away the b5 square from my knight. And what now? The pressure to the d4 pawn is still there. So I thought, okay, maybe let's take and take, but is it good for me or for her? I was not that sure, and because she played it with such confidence, I was not that sure about knight c4 move, and I decided to focus more on e5, because it's hitting the queen directly, getting rid of this pressure forever, so it made more sense. I decided that if she takes ever my pawn, I will be happy, very very happy to take back, because then I get this solidified e5 pawn, no more pressure to the d4 pawn because it's no longer there, and I have the space, I have the tempo to the queen, feels nice. So really what I had to calculate was the queen moves. Where can the queen go? I believe that f4 and g6 squares are the main ones, due to the fact that g6 square covers on g2 pawn, f4 square on the d4 pawn. However, after both moves, I found some lines. What are they? After queen f4, I was planning on playing simply bishop d3, developing moves, because I did not care about losing either of the pawns. Why? Because let's imagine she take on e5. Now I can actually catch the queen by playing bishop c1. Look at those bishops, they are amazing, right? Taking away a lot of squares. After queen f6, I have already bishop g5, getting the queen. So she would have to go to g4, after which I have the move h3. If she now goes back, after g4, all my pieces work together in order to catch the queen. If she takes on g2, at this point I have rook h2, once again covering all the important squares to get the queen, and therefore I was not that scared about queen f4 continuation on the move number 6, because at this point I could have, normally developed and then try to catch the queen. With queen g6 though, it's a little bit different story, because after bishop d3, let's say, she might take my pawn and I'm not in time in order to catch the queen. However, at this point I felt like my initiative might be so good that it might be even worth a pawn. So also after queen g6 I was not that worried, and I can also try to play, let's say, h3 move in between, because if she does like something, then after bishop d3, queen g2, I would also be able to catch the queen. So when I was considering this position, and I felt like, okay, it might be scary, but then the deeper I got into the calculation, the more I felt it's not that good of a move, I decided to go with e5, because I was not scared about this, or this. And I believe that, as I've said, my opponent mixed up the variations a little bit, because at this point she started thinking a lot about the position, and in the end just decided to trade on e5 and play queen e7. And this was the point when I knew that I am much better, because this queen move didn't accomplish much. I have this space advantage, I have a better development, so nothing worrying at my side. I should be much better, and therefore I decided to simply develop. Also, I had the question whether or not I should just push for initiative as of now, because d6 square is a weak one, so maybe I should go with knight c3, knight b5 continuation, but I felt like after simply castling long, my opponent is alright. She protects this square and this square, so knight d6, king b8 does not accomplish much. I have this good knight, but it can be undermined, so I was not sure what to think about it. And after queen d6 that I was briefly calculating with the intention of checkmating the opponent, my opponent can simply play here and there. During the game I felt like it's not working, because if the king goes away I get the pawn and the fork, but obviously at this point she has bishop takes d6 move and nothing happens. Not only that, in here, instead of trading the queens, I found a move bishop to e8, which uncovers the rook, everything is protected, attacked, exchanged, and black is fine. Due to this reason, I felt like, okay, I don't have to push with knight c3, I can simply develop pieces because I have time for it. So I decided to go knight b2, d2, g3, and bishop g2. At this point, my opponent decided to push f5. It's a logical move to consider, since my opponent is lacking space, so at least this is the attempt to get some space. And not only that, this pawn would actually take away the e4 square, which is a perfect one for my knight. And since I am better in development, I am more active and so on, I decided that opening up the position will be a good practical choice. Even though computer does not like taking the pawn so much, I felt like it's so obvious that I didn't even think a minute about it. I just took a pawn. After she took back, I played queen e2, and after e5 I believe I have a critical moment, because I have to decide where to castle with the king, either a short castle or a long castle. I felt like the way to go for my opponent would be to try to activate her pieces and maybe exchange some of mine, because if you consider those two bishops, you may tell immediately that they are better than those ones. Also, the knight has not moved yet, so I felt like in this dynamic my opponent will go for some exchanges, and the obvious one felt like it will be knight h6, knight f5, and some kind of the knight d4. The problem with this idea is that I cannot stop it. At the same time, if the exchanges happen on the d4 move, she might try to make her pawn chain better, for example with taking it with a pawn at some point, and then she would have this pawn chain that might be not that easily breakable, and I would love to try to break it with the move like c3. And if I want to break it with the move c3, perhaps it was not the best idea to castle there. That was my, let's say, long-term thinking process, and I decided to proceed with short castle to then be later on able to push this c3 move, and the game continued as expected. So she played knight h6, I decided that I have no way to stop this maneuver, so I decided to just simply continue my development, and even though I felt like at this point I'm not having such a big advantage that I hope to have after the opening, I felt like I still should be better, so that's fine. Also, it may look like I am just allowing knight d4, losing the initiative and so on, however I have some little trick to it. What's the trick? If she plays knight d4 and I exchange once, she cannot really capture back with the knight, because then after further exchange, I have queen f3 quiet move. What does this move accomplish? I am basically creating a double attack. One to the pawn, and one to the second pawn with the mating threat. Okay, knight stands in the way, but the idea is that if, let's say, black is not cautious and play like this, I can now try to jump with the knight somewhere with the idea of checkmating the opponent. Knight d6 would be the obvious move, with the checkmate like that, surely. After king c7 though, it's not that obvious that I will be able to checkmate, because at this point king might try to escape. In the game I felt like I saw 1-2 with queen a6, she cannot play here because I take, so she has to go back, then I take here, and maybe at this point I would be able to checkmate her, something along those lines. Anyway, those are the threats, therefore she's not allowed to play on d4 and then recapture with the knight, and I was happy about it, because if she now decides to take with a pawn, I'm happy because then I get this c3 move that I was mentioning 5 moves ago. And in the end, actually my opponent took the bait and she went with knight d4, and by the, let's say, body language, I felt like she was planning on taking back with the knight, but then she realized that it's not working due to this amazing queen f3 move. And at this point I felt like her best option would be to play bishop c6, trying to pin my queen to the knight and so on, but after this variation I would be having clear pawn advantage, and even though those are the opposite colored bishops, I should be winning. I felt like it's not the best I could have gotten from the advantage that I had from the opening, but in the end I felt okay, I will be just trying to win this game, should be okay. However, as I've said, at this point after knight d4 and take, my opponent decided not to proceed with knight d4, and she took with a pawn, after which I played c3 move, she opted for bishop f5, after which I took on d4, trying to create a weakness. Once again she cannot recapture with the knight, this time for the different reason. If she now takes with the pawn like that or with the rook like that, I will always have queen c4 move, hitting the king and the pawn, getting the pawn advantage and a winning position. For those reasons she decided to take with a pawn immediately, so that knight is blocking this c file, so I cannot deliver this check. And at this point I played a baiting move. What is it? Rook f to e1. Why is it baiting? Because at first glance it looks like it's an okay move, right? I'm developing a rook. However, I'm kind of getting under the pin more. Not only that, this move provokes queen e6. Why? Because after this move my opponent is threatening with the bishop g4 move, trying to pin my queen to the rook. Also it's threatening with bishop b4, trying to hit this rook that I just moved. And this is the bait. I was hoping that my opponent will play queen e6 because it's so tempting, allowing me to play my next move. And at the same time I was not really seeing any other good alternative, because I was planning on playing queen f3 and opening up this pin this time for my purpose, and then hitting those weaknesses with still maintaining big advantage. And after queen e6 I believe I have a hammer blow, let's say queen b5. Right now I am opening this discovered attack to the queen. I am hitting all the weaknesses that I really want to hit together with my bishop, so all my pieces are well coordinated, hitting all the weak spots, and I should be simply even winning here, because there is really no way for the opponent to make the position work. Let's imagine she tries to cover the b7 weakness. How can she do it? Queen f7, bam, now the bishop is lost. Okay, queen d7, bam, now the pawn is lost. So queen has just too much on her mind, Therefore, opponent has to try something else. What can it be? Well, maybe exchanging the knight, maybe now playing queen d7 or f7, right? Maybe now she's holding. But not really. With bishop f4, I am focusing basically with all my pieces on all her weaknesses, once again getting the material advantage, so I should be much better. So what else? Maybe rook d5 at this point, right? Hitting the queen, protecting the bishop. At this point though, I have a very nice tactical trick involving the discovered attack once again, knight d6. I'm discovering the attack to the queen, to the rook, and most importantly I gave a check, so if she takes with a queen, I take the exchange. If she takes with a rook, I take the queen, maintaining big material advantage. So out of all the possibilities, basically the only one that she has is bishop g4, because it goes away from the attack, it attacks a rook, so maybe it will get a tempo, and yeah, what should I do now? And I've calculated very nice line of knight c5, hitting the queen and threatening with checkmate, and after queen f7 I would take on c6, with the idea that if she takes now here, I can simply take the pawn, go away with the rook, maintain the material advantage and the initiative. If she, let's say, take on c5 now, I can simply take back, take the pawn, and take the second one, and now get the 2-pawn advantage with still holding the initiative. And one more variation I wanted to show you guys because it's so nice. After she would accept my exchange, I would give her a check here, king c7, knight a6, dragging the king out wide in the center, and after the king d6 I have an amazing bishop a3 move, and look at this, all my pieces work together in order to checkmate the opponent. Every piece is involved in the attack. Very nice situation. You always want such thing to happen. For those reasons, bishop g4 at this point is also not working. So what else can she play? The basically only move is a6, trying to get the tempo of my queen and kick it out from this amazing square. So very good practical choice. However, after queen b6, I am still maintaining pressure to those two squares, and instead of attacking the bishop, I attack the pawn. So queen f7 now is allowed since the bishop is okay, but at this point I have the opportunity to take the pawn on d4, and I took that chance. The problem with knight c5 move that might be tempting was that after queen c7 and a trade, I was not sure what to think about this position, because as of now this pawn is protected, this knight is hit, I don't have the pressure to those squares, so I was not feeling that great about it. Therefore I decided to just proceed with taking one pawn. I expected the move bishop b4 because it comes up with the tempo, and I decided to play a cheeky move, once again a little bit baiting, which is rook f1. What's that, right? I'm going away from the open file. What am I even thinking about? The idea is that I didn't want to get under one pin, second pin, and so on, so I wanted to get back to f1 with one of the rooks, because I felt like once again my opponent might be, let's say, baited a little bit, and play rook e1, after which I got something prepared. I have knight takes f6. I take the second pawn, and not only that, I'm hitting the rook, I'm hitting the knight, I'm hitting the bishop, and everything is holding because I have a good defense on the d4 square, so I am just fine. In this point, however, I thought for a second that rook takes d4 might be an annoying move, because after knight takes e8 that I was originally planning on playing, the problem is that after bishop a5 my queen is out of moves, so obviously I'm still holding the advantage, but I would have to find queen d4 move, which is not that obvious since it is giving the queen away for the possibility of delivering a fork, but it's not that easy. So I would either have to find this or go back to this point and perhaps take here, but once again after bishop a5 and queen f6 it's not that obvious how to continue. So I would say that rook takes d4 was the most challenging move. However, my opponent collapsed completely since she played rook e6, after which I simply undermined, removed the defender of the bishop before by taking the knight on c6, getting the free piece, and at this point on move number 26 my opponent resigned the game. So it was a very nice game by myself. I believe I won due to the opening problems and bad decisions of the opponent. Perhaps she mixed up the variations, but a win is a win. I was very happy to win in such manner, especially after such a long time without a win, because if you remember I won with the first round, this is the 8th round, so many games without a win. Finally I got it against a very experienced and good opponent, so happy with that. I'll take that. And with that, let's check the review. So yeah, as you can tell, pretty nice result from me, 92 accuracy. My opponent had a lower one, mostly due to the mistakes and inaccuracies during the opening phase of the game that allowed me to maintain the initiative throughout all of it, and then under pressure it was very hard for my opponent to find good moves. Therefore I was the one that was leading all the way and had a better accuracy, so pretty happy with the win, even though it may be also because of the opening problems for the opponent. I'll take that. Still, a win against the double Polish woman chess champion is a nice achievement, and that's that. And with that, guys, I had 4.5 points out of 8, so meaning that even if I lost the last round, I would be finishing on 50% points, so very nice result. But without spoiling the last game, let's finish this analysis here. Let me know if you liked the game and the analysis. If so, leave a like, subscribe to the channel to not miss out the last episode of this tournament. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see each other. Bye bye.